Hi guys! This is going to be my November wrap-up and my December TBR because I did not read very much in November, unfortunately. I finished 2 books, and that's partially because it was the holidays and I was spending time with my family, and partially because I got sick for a week. And you would think if you were sick and you're home alone and you have nothing else to do, just laying in bed, you'd be able to read a ton, but no, I had no energy, didn't read at all, and I was very sad about it. But I still finished 2 books, slowly making my way through a third that I've been reading for months now, but let's just get into it. So the first book that I did finish was We Are the Ants by Shaun Hutchinson. I'd say this is a young adult sci-fi contemporary mixture. It deals with aliens. It's about a boy who gets abducted by aliens every so often, but it's also about his life and his struggles with depression that stems from his boyfriend committing suicide and bullying at school and family issues. And basically these aliens abduct him every so often and they give him the choice to save the world from complete destruction by just pressing a button. And the story is basically about his indecision between saving the world or thinking that humanity would be better off if it was completely wiped out and started fresh. So the story is pretty contemporary, following his daily life for the span of a couple months. But there's also a lot of science even outside of the aliens. There's a lot of physics and astronomy just brought into the basic narrative of the story as well. So it is pretty science heavy, so I would say it's still a sci-fi, but it also has contemporary leanings. The narrative is kind of interspersed with these apocalyptic scenarios about possible ways the world might end if he doesn't press the button, and I think I misspoke in my vlog saying that the world would end by an asteroid. That was just one of the options that he gave. I wasn't very far in the book at that point, so it was interesting seeing all of these creative ways that the world could possibly end. I thought the characters were really realistic. They weren't predictable and they seemed very human. I could understand some of their motivations and then others I couldn't really, which is kind of how people are. So I really appreciated that the characters were really well developed that way. This book dealt with a lot of really hard-hitting topics. I don't normally read about heavy things like suicide, so it has a really important message for a lot of people who go through these problems. I think it was done well, but I don't have much experience with it. I don't really seek out books like this, so I'm not the best person to review that aspect of it, but it was really impactful for me at least. And it opened my eyes to some different perspectives that I haven't seen before, which I appreciate. It's a little open-ended, which I'm not the biggest fan of, but it made sense in this context, so I'll let that slide. I still think this was a really good read and a really both interesting and informative read, for me at least, so I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. The next book I picked up and finished was The Wicked Deep by Shea Ernshaw. This is a YA fantasy story set in a seaside town in Oregon where 200 years ago 3 witches were drowned in the sea. And every year since then they've come back and stolen girls' bodies from the town and drowned boys in the harbor during the summer. I really liked this book. I was completely sucked in. I read it in one sitting on a delayed flight, so I didn't really have much else to do, but I didn't really care because I was so absorbed in this book, and that has not happened in a long time. It was really creepy and atmospheric, set in this rainy seaside town in the Pacific Northwest, which is where I am. I just moved to recently, so that was really interesting for me. And it also matched the fall weather outside, and it was just perfect. I always love witches. I love witches in basically any story, so that also helped its case. But also the plot was just really fascinating the whole way through. I'm not normally a plot person, I'm normally a character person, but actually in this book I was so absorbed in the plot that I didn't really notice the characters that much. I thought that the 2 to 3 main characters were well developed and really nicely portrayed in this, but all of the other characters, the side characters, and even some of the important characters that are not quite side characters but not quite the main character were a little less developed. They were pretty flat and pretty surface level, but the plot had me so tied in that I didn't really notice until I looked back on it at the end when I'd finished and I had time to sit and think about what I just read. But as I was going through it, it wasn't bothering me too much. I did note it with one of the characters, her best friend, that she seemed very flat. But other than that, it was so enjoyable that I kind of dropped my normal fixation on characters, which is crazy. One thing about the writing did throw me off while I was reading it and kind of took me out of the story, and that's that it's written in present tense, which there was just a discussion recently about on the Sword and Laser podcast, which I listen to regularly, about how present tense can make some readers uncomfortable because they're taught that books should be written in third person past tense, and that's what we normally see in books. And I kind of understand that because I am used to reading in past tense. So when this was written in present tense, there were certain parts where actions like sitting was being portrayed in real time. So she sits on the bench or whatever, and that kind of just sounded clunky to me. I don't know if it's because it's just better to write in the past tense or if it's because that's just what I'm used to. I don't know, but it did throw me off a little bit. Other than that though, this book was so much fun and I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. So moving into my December TBR, I am still reading The Mists of Avalon by Marion Zimmer Bradley. I am halfway through this, about, more or less. This is a King Arthur story, and the novel thing about it is that it's told from the perspective of the women in the tale. And actually, after reading it for half the book, it's hard to imagine it being told from any other perspective. Like, these characters seem so big and so important that it's kind of weird to think that this isn't the normal way to tell King Arthur, because it seems like you get a much better understanding of the story and everything that's happening from these women's perspectives, and it just kind of blows my mind that this is like a new thing for this book. I mean, it was written in like 1985, so it's not so new anymore, but it was just kind of weird to think about. I have this on ebook now, so I am slowly working through it in my downtime at work as well, so I don't need to just carry around this big ol' chunker. But it's actually also really satisfying to read in this because it's so floppy. But it also still feels like a textbook, so I don't know. I hope to finish this before the end of the year. I really want to finish this before the end of the year because I've been reading this since September now. And there are so many books that I need to read that I need to finish this. So yeah, I'll be really focusing on this in the next couple weeks. The other book that I'm currently reading on audiobook is An Absolutely Remarkable Thing by Hank Green. I am 25% through this, so it's about a girl who makes a viral video and then has to deal with all of the fame and the repercussions and everything that comes with that. But it's also a sci-fi book. So that's been a really interesting mix of things, and I don't know how I feel about it so far. I'm kind of torn on it because it feels like it's more of a commentary on society rather than a story in itself. So I'm like picking out these one-liners of like what he's saying about social media and our current fame culture and everything, rather than getting engaged in the story or the characters or the plot or anything. It kind of feels like the book is just a vehicle for his messages rather than a story in its own right. So I don't know if that'll change over time. I'm not sure yet. It's kind of makes it a little hard for me to want to pick up the book in the first place, but since it's an audiobook, I just listen to it on my commute and I will get through it that way. We'll see how I feel about it once I finish it before the end of the year for sure. And the last book that I plan to pick up in December is The Bear and the Nightingale by Katherine Arden. All I know about this is that it's about Russian folklore and fairy tales and magical creatures, and it's set in a wintry cabin in the woods, and that sounds absolutely perfect for what I want right now because it's winter and it's really cold outside and it's really dark all the time. So I want a little whimsical fairy tale that sounds perfect. And so I plan to pick that up also before the end of the year. I will try to pick up more books as well, but I also really want to finish Mists of Avalon, so I'm not sure how much more I'll be able to read outside of that. We will see. I'll be optimistic and hope that I can finish more. I don't know. I'll find out. But that's it for today. Let me know what you plan to read in December and what you read last month that was really good in November. So that's it, and I will see you later. Bye.